Welcome to Speaking of Steel, MEPS International's new podcast bringing insights, interviews, and, if you wait to the end, a little bit more audience interaction. There will be an opportunity to ask questions or get in touch with MEPS for a little bit more information about our steel prices, indices, and forecasts. Today, Speaking of Steel, we'll be approaching the changes that have recently been made to the EU's import safeguard measures. And we've got a panel of experts from MEPS that will explain exactly what the implications of those changes are. Later on, we'll give a summary of the ESR review, one of our key publications, and some of the forecast theories from our team that will look forward into the remainder of 2024 and beyond. But for now, I'll introduce our panel of speakers involved in our Q&A on the EU safeguard measures. Today are MEPS market analysts, Chris Jackson to my right here, John Carruthers-Green to my left, and on the end, Kaye Ayub, who is MEPS Head of Steel Price Analysis. So straight into it today, John, I think we need to address the major change probably of the last month.
It's the important thing, the topic everybody's talking about. So it's the changes to the EU steel safeguards that are coming out on the 1st of July. So we've had these safeguard measures been in place now for around about 6 years, since 2018. And the review takes place every 2 years. What we currently have is a quota and a tariff applied to any imports that come over that quota. The big change really, though, is to the hot rolled coil category.
And I mean, before we go into that in a little bit more depth, what is the main purpose of the safeguards? What are they there for?
Okay, so the steel safeguards, like I said, they've been in place since 2018. And there's really sort of two aspects of these. First of all, it's to, well, as the name suggests, to safeguard the European steel industry. And that's to protect it essentially from the big change in trade patterns that we saw after the announcement of the Section 232 measures in the United States. So the worry then was that there was going to be a lot of material that was being diverted away from the US markets into Europe. So these measures are really there to help sort of protect that industry.
Okay. So what have been the key changes during this latest period, and why have they been implemented?
Okay, so every 2 years, the part of the way these safeguard regulations work is they have to be reviewed. They have to be sort of shown to still be necessary, and as part of that review, the European Commission carried out an investigation where they spoke to a whole range of people in the European markets, people that were important. They tried to get a sort of a wide range of views. And really sort of what they saw was the big issue was the hot rolled coil category. The imports there are probably around about sort of a third of the total imports of sort of finished steel products into the EU. So that was a really big important category for them. What they'd seen was that there are some countries that receive country-specific quotas, and there are some which are all sort of lumped together in this other countries category. But since they were first announced, we've seen a big change in trade patterns. So this other countries category, we've seen a lot of material coming from the countries that fall in that. So we're talking Egypt, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan are all using a large proportion of this quota.
And I guess the changes are going to address that in some way.
Yeah, so the changes really are, each one of these countries now can only bring in 15% of this total other countries' quota. So that's 950,000 tons per quarter, I think it was, that was set at as a total. So now each one of them can only bring in sort of 15% of that, which is about 140,000 tons a quarter. These guys have been bringing in much more than that. So we're looking sort of nearly sort of 300,000 for some of them. Egypt, Vietnam in particular were pointed out in the review.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's probably a good point to bring in some of MEPS research in recent months to understand exactly what the effect of that's going to be. Chris, you talk to people across Europe, really, and gather their thoughts on exactly, what any changes to prices or legislation like this are likely to be. So what is their feedback? How do you expect them to adapt to the changes to these categories?
Yeah, I think as John correctly mentions there, I think it's certainly been a major talking point, a little bit of bone of contention amongst the hot roll coal buyers that we talk to across Europe. I think the situation has been quite fluid. They've had to change and react very quickly. Firstly, the speculation about the other countries' country cap, and now the implementation of that. And certainly, market respondents have mentioned to us that the measures were in some ways very unjust, maybe a little unfair in terms of the timing of the safeguards, in that a lot of material was already at European ports, or certainly on vessels heading towards Europe. So in the first few days of the quarter, we've certainly seen some interesting trends, and there is a feeling amongst the buyers that there will be quite a significant duty to be paid for material that will come in from Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Egypt, and certainly buyers are prepared for that. And a few of the early signals seem to suggest that, as market demands throughout Europe are very weak at the moment, that European buyers may take the option of partial clearance, maybe taking, for example, 50% of their requirements to use for the quarter, but then maybe keeping the remainder at port for clearance in October. And we've already seen a few patterns already where maybe the countries that are predominantly part of the country cap have been sidelined to an extent, and we are seeing Turkey talked about a lot more, and maybe some new emerging players such as Indonesia and Malaysia, which in the long term might provide an alternative source of supply.
So in actual fact, there's a huge shift here for certain importers in the fact that they're going to have to diversify where they get their material, and some of it might have to stay at port, I guess, at some cost to them.
Yeah, certainly so. I mean, one or two market respondents, one correctly claimed that they felt like the condition of the game had changed during the game, if you like. So that has certainly moved the goalpost to an extent, and people have had to react very quickly. But in the short term, people have the option of clearing the material, obviously at an additional cost with a duty being applied, or they can keep the material at port, but that will also incur demurrage costs and possible logistical problems awaiting clearance in October. So certainly those buyers in Europe who are predominantly reliant on non-European supply, they've certainly had to act pretty fast and take immediate steps to try and minimise the damage, if you like.
Great football analogy in there, Chris.
Yeah, obviously great timing with the European Championships going ahead at the moment.
Absolutely.
I think that's a key point, though. That the market only heard of these decisions during that WTO notification, and that was at the end of May. And then there was this period of consultation, and there was this worry that these measures might even be changed ever so slightly before the actual official announcement. And then we only got that official announcement on the 26th of June. So a very short amount of time between these rule changes coming into effect and people having to sort of react to them.
Yeah, some perceived unfairness in there, particularly from businesses bringing coils in.
I mean, it's certainly been argued from a few of the market respondents we talked to that maybe arguably a more fairer system would have been to implement the other countries' country cap in October. This would have given companies the necessary time to prepare, to make plans for potential duty or potential alternative sources of supply. But obviously, at a week or two's notice, that wasn't an option for them.
Okay, coming to you, because there's clearly implications on cost. People are having to, in some cases, look for new sources of material, and as Chris mentioned there, the cost of storage at ports in some cases. So how's this affecting your methodology with the forecast?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw previously when, we've had importers and the tonnages going above the quotas, and you've got that import tariffs being applied. We've seen the mills try to implement a price rise that was almost mirroring the import tariff that was paid. And I think we will sort of see a similar sort of tactic taken by the European mills. They will they will attempt to put price rises through in July. Whether the buyers will, be willing to pay that is another matter. The market at the moment, demand is still pretty weak. We're seeing supply will reduce during July, and we're seeing some extended maintenance outages during the summer period. But generally, demand also reduces during that time. So whether we'll see any significant increases during the summer period is yet to be seen. I think we might see some gradual increases at the moment during the third quarter, but I don't think we'll see any major spike quite as yet. I think it may be gradual at this moment in time. But yes, definitely an upward trend in prices is likely to occur as a result of this. These changes.
Huge difficulty being, as we've seen, that lack of demand. I mean, how much of a factor is that? People won't pay a price for steel that they can't sell on the outsell market, I guess.
Yeah, when you've got downstream demand slowing and, you've got that difficulty in selling and passing on those increased costs. I mean, the distributors, the manufacturers, they've all got to make a profit and a margin there. So, they've also got to think about, the viability of their businesses. And the mills, I know they're trying to make profit. They're struggling as well with their margins. But there's a balance to be had in the market. We've got less pressure from the raw material costs, at least. The raw material costs haven't really moved a great deal recently, and we're not expecting much influence from raw material costs over the next 3 to 6 months. We're expecting them to remain reasonably stable, which I think should help a little bit in the market. But
John, we've heard that a lot of importers could quite understandably feel aggrieved by these changes. Has there been any pushback from individual countries themselves with this extension of the safeguard quotas and the changes that we've seen?
Yes, there has. Not necessarily sort of to do with these particular changes, but with the safeguards sort of in whole. They've been challenges pretty much after very soon after they first came in. The issue that there is that this takes a very long time. First of all, for a challenge to be raised, and then for it to be discussed, and any kind of sort of decision being made. There's big issues at the WTO itself, where the arbitration court that deals with this kind of thing doesn't sit particularly often. So these things do take a long time. But we've seen particular challenges from India, from Turkey, over different aspects of the safeguards.
So is there a likelihood that we'll see a change, any retrospective action take place?
I wouldn't expect so, but one key point to remember is that these safeguards will only be in place until June 26. This is the last time that they're going to be extended. So they'll be in place for another 2 years, and the quota amounts that are set there will be it, basically. By the time that I think any challenges do come to fruition, it'll be over. Like I say, because it takes so long for that process to happen.
Important to make the point as well. I guess the named countries there, traditional exporters. I guess there will be a source of frustration there. They see Europe and North America as potential sales channels. The market in Asia has been ongoingly weak for quite a long period of time. So the likes of Nippon Steel in Japan, CSC in Taiwan, will always look at Europe as a potential source to sell their surplus material, and obviously with the new regulations that will be limited to an extent. So in terms of that, it comes at quite a bad time from the exporter's point of view as well.
Okay, understand. And as I understand it, John, there are also changes in the UK as well, which, lest we forget, is part of Europe. Their safeguards have also undergone a bit of a change.
Yes, so it's part of this regular review. The UK safeguards have recently been extended for 2 years. So the safeguard mechanism that is in the UK was first set up when they were still within the European Union. So a lot of the sort of the administration of it was sort of set back in 2018, but there is definitely now some variation between the UK and the EU safeguards. So the UK ones, though, they don't cover quite as many product categories. First of all, one of the changes that that we potentially could have seen at the start of this month was also to do with hot rolled coil, but for slightly different reasons. With the situation with Tata in Port Talbot, so the closure of currently one blast furnace, but and the second one, it could be happening sooner, it could be happening a little later this year. There's going to be issues with supply, and the UKTRA, the Trade Remedies Authorities, which is like the independent body that sort of examines all of this, they recommended that the hot roll coil tariffs are first of all suspended for 9 months, and then secondly that there is some kind of reassessment of the actual sort of tariff levels, the quota levels for this product. We'd hope to see some kind of news on that the other day when they were announced, but nothing as of yet. That's clearly going to be a decision that whoever's the Secretary of State for Business and Trade in a few days' time gets to deal with.
Okay, but ultimately, I guess the upshot is that things have largely carried on as you were in the UK.
Largely, yeah, very little change. I think we saw like a 3% increase on the actual sort of quota allowances, which is pretty standard. But like I say, the key issue was going to be this hot roll coil. We had a couple of different camps suggesting that there could be a specific quota just for Tata for the material that they would need, and then they'd be either process and then a separate quota for the rest of the market, as it were. But we've not heard anything about that yet.
Is there a risk that there's a knock-on effect between these two safeguard measures, in that those countries that are now looking for other places than Europe to bring in their material might opt for the UK market instead?
The key countries are going to be Egypt, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Japan. Each one of those regularly exceeded this 15%. So there is potential for some kind of redirection, but I think one of the key things we've got to remember for the UK tariffs is that once again these are set depending on the source country, the quotas, and by far the largest was going into the UK was from the EU, so they have the biggest quota. I think that's something like 180,000 tons a quarter, whereas the other countries, of which they all are, was something like only 20,000 tons. It really wasn't a whole lot. So if they are going to redirect into the UK, that tariff's going to be applied. But like I say, the big one with the EU into the UK was the big quota into the UK was from the EU, which could be used by Tata themselves. I mean, we've heard talk of I think Tata themselves have actually said it.
Yeah, I mean, we've had complaints previously of Tata utilising all of the other quotas from people in the market. Now, if there isn't a suspension of that hot roll coil quota, then obviously we're going to start getting complaints from using the EU quota as well. But yeah, because they will be importing not just hot roll coil but also slabs from their other plants, not just in Europe but also in India and potentially others. I think they said in their announcement when they announced the closure of the blast furnaces. So there is going to be more material coming in from outside of the UK to feed the UK market once those blast furnaces are taken offline. And there's quite a long transition period before the electric arc furnaces are going to be up and running for by Tata to supply the UK market. So without that suspension or something else in place to protect the supply into the UK market, there's going to be
I think
a supply issue.
I think one thing Tata themselves would say is that they've this has been on the radar for quite some time, and they've taken measures to bring material in already.
Yeah,
and it will be interesting as well. I mean, we talk about hot roll coil, but I guess when you look at the family of coil products, the implementation of the country cap will, whether EU wide, and obviously implication for UK is hot roll coil, but certainly for cold roll coil, it's widely acknowledged that there is a lack of local regional supply, and there is a need for for imports. So it will be interesting in time whether, if local European mills use the opportunity to push again on pricing in the absence of the big four named countries, certainly in the short term, and whether that price gap between hot rolled coil and the value added products, particularly cold rolled coil, as imports are still coming in good quantities and at relatively cheap levels, whether that price gap will narrow in time.
How nervous are people on the ground in the UK about this potential shift with Tata's reliance and the impact on quotas?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a little bit of a concern. People certainly value the presence of a local domestic mill. I think they all see the benefits of that, the commercial technical liaison, the quick access to delivery, and obviously the close links that they have with a local domestic mill. So I think it is of great concern. I think people who are pretty reliant on quick delivery, quick turnaround, certainly do value that. The buyers who can afford to wait, maybe some of the biggest stockists who maybe buy more in bulk, sizable quantities, can maybe afford to wait, and they can maybe weigh up the import options that are available. Obviously, they may be limited in the short term, but over the longer term, you would expect buyers to explore, look at new options, and maybe pursue that over the longer term.
So, John, it feels like we're at the start of a new phase when it comes to safeguard measures, quite a divisive moment for both the EU and the UK in terms of supply chain. We've got 2 years of this now. I guess people will ease into the new way of doing things. But what comes beyond that?
So yeah, after June 2026, the safeguard measures, they have to be removed. It's part of the WTO regulations that were used to put them in place. That essentially, if a safeguard measure is in effect, it then has to be removed for at least the same amount of time that it was in effect before you could use it again. Once again, the idea is to keep everything fair and keep that sort of trade flowing. So what it will do in 26 is, to a certain extent, leave the European market exposed. One thing that will be coming in, which may alleviate things slightly, is going to be the CBAM. That's due to the definitive period of that's due to come in January 2026, and that's going to apply an import tariff. But I think what we've got to remember is the carbon costs that are being added as an import cost will also be added to European steelmakers. So I don't really see that as something that will protect the industry. Certainly not from this excess trade. I think that's still going to be an issue in 2026, and I'm not sure exactly where we go from there.
And it's an important point that John raised. I think a big talking point again amongst the market respondents we talked to is there's obviously a lot going on at the moment. CBAM, the safeguard measures, the focus may be more towards green steel, but I think people's immediate focus with market demands being quite low is a lot of companies are facing a fight for survival. I think it's fair to say, and I think they may be making the move or imploring that the European authorities do look at ways to try and create a long-lasting and sustainable demand in Europe, and I think that will go a long way to helping not just the users of steel, but also the steel manufacturers as well.
So there's been a few questions from contacts, I know, about the potential cost of these changes, the cost of bringing steel in and the cost in a wider market. What sort of initial feedback have we had?
So we've had some of our first sort of calls with our research partners and sort of got their sort of like immediate sort of snapshot view, and it looks as though they're expecting a price rise of around about sort of 40 to 80 euros on this material. And like I say, it all really depends on which country it's coming from and exactly how far they are over the quota. But that's the kind of number they're sort of factoring in at the moment. Which I think is why we're hearing some talk of potential for price rises within European steelmakers. Whether that actually happens, whether they look to increase prices or, more likely, I think, look to increase output. I think that's probably where we're going to end up as the immediate sort of response. I'm not sure if we're going to get a big jump in prices when we actually sort of look at the numbers at the end of the research period. But I think the European mills are certainly going to use this as an impetus to certainly ask for more, whether there's enough demand in the market.
And it's interesting at the moment. I think you've seen the immediate reaction of buyers is I know the likes of Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Egypt are pretty much on the sidelines at the moment. So lots of European buyers are looking at Turkey as a supplier of choice. Turkish suppliers are naturally very competitive in terms of lead time. But at the moment, with the anti-dumping duty on Turkish supply, our market respondents are saying that there's very little price advantage to supplying from Turkey from European mills. So the European mills will use that maybe as a rationale or a tool in their armour, if you like, to push again on price. And it'll be interesting now the implementation of the caps being put in place, whether they may have a little bit more success this time around.
Okay, so some winners and losers.
We often find that the mills across Europe will take a different approach and different stance on things, either by increasing production or being a little bit firmer in their pricing approaches. So we'll get a mixed bag, I think, when it comes back on the data that we receive from the market. So it'll be an interesting one when we get all the information back at the end of the research period.
And it will be an interesting time. Obviously, the implementation of the measures aligned to maybe the summer outages that will be enforced by the majority of European mills. I guess there is a rationale for increases, but then at the back of people's minds are that market demand still remain very low. And we expect that situation to continue for the next few months. So any potential increase could be quite modest in scale and may ultimately prove to be quite short-lived in the medium term.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that's happened is that fear that this is going to happen. And I think once we've got over the sort of the shock of this change, things will sort of settle down a little again.
It's okay, I guess, looking way out as you tend to do with forecasting. I guess potentially 2 years from now, we might be looking at a whole new set of very volatile things coming into play unless the EU and UK come together and have tangible solutions for these problems. There's going to be real volatility in the market potentially. Yeah,
you're going to have a higher cost base for the manufacturing sector here in Europe and the UK, but potentially increased threat from outside of Europe, sort of in the supply side. So it's going to be an interesting time and one that we need to factor in and consider all the variables when it comes to forecasting.
Absolutely. I think if we think it's volatile now, watch this space. There's certainly a lot more to come. But I think CBAM, other topics like that will be things that we address in future podcasts. We've got a whole series of topics to address. And of course, we want viewers to subscribe, get involved, and come back time and time again for your market insight from MEPS. That's the key thing. Now we've got to look forward to the ESR review and also a bit of a forward-looking forecast for the coming months. With every episode of Speaking of Steel, brought to you by MEPS International, we'll bring you a summary of one of our steel reviews, monthly insight, price indices and forecasts from across the world. This month, we're going to bring you a portion of our European Steel Review, which you can subscribe to and ensure that you get that insight on a monthly basis straight into your inbox. For now, it's going to be brought to you by our market analyst, Chris Jackson, who you've just heard of, hopefully, in part of our discussion in the Q&A. Chris, what is it that we're seeing in the market this month and that's been reflected in the latest ESR?
Yeah, I think the major theme in the June edition of the European Steel Review was typically a lack of activity, a shortage of orders. That was one of the key themes that was mentioned in a lot of our discussions, and in some ways price has almost become a secondary discussion in many ways. Certainly across Europe, market sentiment is negative. The approaching holiday period is not helping matters, and we do not expect demand to improve too much in the next few months. Typically, a lot of the economic indicators and the PMIs are below 50 at the moment, which is indicating negative territory. The recent initiative by the European Central Bank as well to reduce interest rates by a quarter of a point almost seems symbolic or psychological in nature, and we certainly won't feel a short-term impact of that. And arguably, the market is still reeling from the previous rate cuts that were implemented late last year and early this year. Certainly from a demand perspective, market respondents say that buying activity is low from both the service centre level and end user level as well. Many stockists are typically only buying what they need. They are working with existing inventories and very small volumes. Arguably, a lot of the service centres that we talk to are still in destocking mode, and interestingly, prices for resale material from further down the supply chain is actually lower than the mill replacement costs at the moment. From an end user perspective, end user activity is typically soft. There's a lot of mixed signals surrounding the automotive sector at the moment. The projected forecasts are positive, but the truth is that there are question marks against that. The switch to electric vehicles is a consideration for the major car makers across the region, and arguably the cost of the electric vehicles plus the lack of infrastructure in many countries is obviously a discouraging factor there as well. We've also seen negative trends across white goods and yellow goods, and we've seen that for a prolonged period of time. And certainly the interest rate measures that were implemented in the UK and across Europe to combat inflationary pressures has been particularly felt in the construction sector. I think we've seen residential construction be particularly hit as the high cost of finance has weighed down on new housing bills.
I guess we're going to see some influence from the elections across Europe as well, and very, very recently in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think undoubtedly economics and politics do mix, and certainly a lot of policies with regards to the European elections recently and the attitude and focus on green initiatives and renewable initiatives will obviously have a bearing. And certainly UK-wide, we have seen talk in the political manifestos about industrial strategies and a particular focus on the steel industry. And the UK respondents we talked to have felt that's a welcome development. And I guess the proof will be if what's written down in the manifesto will come to fruition in future years. But it's certainly a welcome development in recent times.
Okay, and as we're talking through your ESR notes in terms of supply, I mean we've discussed in the main podcast some key factors in that. What was reflected in the report this month?
Yeah, I think typically the availability of material across flat and long products is generally quite good. One consideration is the impending summer vacation period. A lot of mills will invariably use this as an opportunity to align their supply with current market demands. Manufacturers may not necessarily advertise the fact that they are limiting or reducing capacity, but it is certainly one of the tools in their armoury to try and strengthen their pricing ambitions in the post-holiday period.
Am I right in thinking that some producers actually backed away a little bit in light of that initial safeguards announcement?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think we've seen a few trends and a few patterns emerge across Europe already. There's continued doubts and question marks over the Liberty Group, particularly in Central Europe, in their Romanian and Hungarian operations. This has caused a degree of supply tightness in Central Europe. In other parts of Europe, we still see Acero d'Italia. In Italy, they are still producing at a significantly reduced level than what they did previously. And certainly in Northern Western Europe, there are question marks and doubts surrounding Tata Steel sites in the UK. So while material is readily available at the moment, people do have considerations with regards to producers looking to either limit or reduce their supply, which may become a little bit more prominent during the summer period.
I mean, it'd be nice also to get a bit of a summary, in particular from a product perspective. A lot of the import tariff changes seem to be affecting hot rolled coil. What did we see in the ESR this month?
Yeah, an interesting one in terms of to price. Obviously, I mentioned a little bit of a secondary consideration to the lack of demand, but there were some interesting trends that emerged for coil products. It was interesting. The speculation about the safeguards didn't really have the desired effect. The European manufacturers used that as an opportunity to try and push and target higher prices. Buyers largely opposed and rebuffed their attempts to lift prices, and obviously low market demands are a key factor in that. It will be interesting again now with the actual implementation of the safeguard measures. Mills will invariably try again, most likely for September deliveries again in the post-holiday period. And MEPS do expect that there will be a gradual increase in hot roll coil prices, possibly to the tune of 4 to 5%, as maybe the measures aligned to slightly restricted regional supply will help mills again push for higher prices. But unfortunately, the flip side of that, we do expect any pricing gains to be quite short-lived. I think we do not see too much progress of any particular or significant demand recovery, and this may limit the extent of the manufacturers, and we invariably may see prices become under pressure later in the year, and any gains that are secured in the short term may prove to be lost over the medium term.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Chris. Great summary of where the products are now, and I guess looking forward, ultimately, it feels like that economic weakness is still going to play out.
I think so. I think the lack of demand, the lack of activity is pretty much at forefront of a lot of participants' minds. I think they mentioned that Q1 was pretty much a difficult trading environment for them. A lot of mention to us that the second quarter has been a fight for survival, and certainly any price increases, for instance, we've seen on the long side, maybe modest price increases in June, based from a mill desire to try and improve their profit margins, allied to maybe slightly tighter supply, albeit maybe artificially, that we have seen some positive movement there. But again, in the absence of sustainable, long-lasting demand, then we ultimately see those price gains as being under threat and possibly maybe lost over time.
Okay, Chris, thank you for that snapshot of MEPS European Steel Review. Going forward, as I say, we'll be doing summaries of the various reviews that we produce throughout MEPS to give people a little bit of a taster of the research that we're providing month on month. So thanks for that, and hope to have you back in the hot seat.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Lovely to talk to you, and hopefully nice to share the views with the listeners.
Thank you for joining us for this first episode of Speaking of Steel, brought to you by MEPS International and our research team, backed up by the insight in our various review publications. Hopefully you'll join us again for future episodes, which will hopefully continue to deliver insight, interviews with people inside and outside MEPS, and guarantee the opportunity to interact with us directly at MEPS. On that note, if you want to gain more information about the products we provide, do visit mepsinternational.com. Alternatively, if you've got questions, things that you might like us to address in future episodes or get back to you directly with, you can email us at podcast@mepsinternational.com. Thanks for watching.